In the farthest reaches of space, where ancient civilizations whisper of legends long forgotten, there exists a truth that terrifies even the mightiest of star-spanning empires. Humans don't just survive the impossible, they thrive in it. When the universe's most powerful beings fall to their knees, when magic itself fails and technology crumbles, when all hope seems lost, there's one species that looks at certain death and asks, "Is that all you've got?" Today, on a dying world, where the last of the dragon folk face extinction, a small voice will speak words that will shake the foundations of reality itself. Because sometimes, the greatest power in the universe isn't found in ancient magic or advanced technology. It's found in the stubborn refusal of one human to let evil win. The universe is about to remember why humans are feared across 1,000 galaxies. The crimson sky of Drakmor wept blood-red rain as Marcus Chen dragged his wounded leg across the shattered crystal plains. His military-grade exosuit sparked and hissed with each labored step, its power cells nearly depleted from 3 days of running. Behind him, the smoking wreckage of his ship, the Terran Wanderer, lay scattered across a mile of twisted metal and broken dreams. He was the sole survivor of a crew of 12, and if the distress beacon in his suit was accurate, he was roughly 47,000 light-years from the nearest human settlement. Just another Tuesday for a Terran Expeditionary Force veteran, he thought grimly, checking the medical readout on his heads-up display. 3 broken ribs, internal bleeding, and a compound fracture in his left femur. His nanomeds were working overtime, but they were running low on raw materials. He had maybe 6 hours before his body started shutting down. The landscape around him looked like something from a fever dream. Massive crystal formations jutted from the ground at impossible angles, each one pulsing with a faint, dying light. In the distance, towering spires of what might have once been a great city reached toward the bleeding sky, their surfaces scarred by weapon fire and time. The air itself felt heavy, saturated with something that made his skin crawl and his combat instincts scream warnings. Marcus had served in the Centauri campaign, survived the siege of New Moscow, and walked away from the hell that was the Battle of Kepler. 442b. He'd seen entire worlds burn and watched civilizations crumble. But this place, Drakmor, felt different. It felt like a wound in reality itself, a place where hope came to die. His suit's proximity sensors chimed softly, detecting movement ahead. Marcus instinctively reached for his sidearm, a modified plasma pistol that had saved his life more times than he could count. But as he crested a low ridge of shattered crystal, what he saw made him freeze in place. A massive creature lay dying in a crater of molten glass, its body easily the size of a small building. Its scales shimmered with colors that had no names in human language, deep purples that sang of distant stars, golds that whispered of forgotten dawns, blues that spoke of oceans on worlds that had never known war. This was a dragon, but not the fairy tale kind from Earth's old stories. This was something ancient and magnificent, a being of such raw power that reality itself seemed to bend around it. And it was dying. Dark veins of corruption spread across its hide like poison through its bloodstream. Where they touched, the beautiful scales turned black and crumbled to dust. Its massive head, adorned with horns that could have been carved from starlight itself, lay partially buried in the crystalline sand. One golden eye, large as Marcus's torso, stared sightlessly at the weeping sky. But it was what he saw next that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Huddled against the dragon's massive foreleg was a child. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old by human standards, though her appearance marked her as something far from human. Small horns peeked through her silver hair, and her skin had the faint shimmer of scales. Tiny wings, no larger than a sparrow's, trembled on her back as she pressed her face against the dying dragon's hide. "Mama," she whispered, her voice carrying impossible distances in the thin air. "Mama, please wake up. The bad things are coming back and I'm scared." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen plenty of war orphans in his time, children displaced by the endless conflicts that seemed to follow humanity wherever it went. But this was different. This child wasn't human, wasn't even from a species he recognized. By all the protocols of the Terran Expeditionary Force, he should observe, record, and avoid contact with unknown alien species. Instead, he found himself climbing down into the crater. His movement triggered the child's attention, and she spun toward him with reflexes that would have impressed a combat veteran. Her eyes were the same gold as the dying dragon's, but they held depths of terror and exhaustion that no child should know. For a moment, they stared at each other across the space of 2 different worlds, 2 different species, 2 different realities. Then the child spoke, and her words would haunt Marcus for the rest of his days. "Wake up, Mama," she whispered, pointing a small, clawed finger at him. "Maybe that human can save you." The word human shouldn't have meant anything to her. They were in uncharted space, far from any known trade routes or human settlements. This world wasn't even in the astrogation charts. And yet, somehow, this child knew exactly what he was. Marcus knelt beside the dragon's massive head, his military training warring with something deeper, something more fundamental. The creature's breathing was labored, each exhalation sending small whirlwinds of dust swirling through the air. Up close, he could see that the corruption wasn't natural. It moved with purpose, spreading in patterns that suggested intelligence. This wasn't disease or age. This was an attack. "What's your name, little one?" Marcus asked softly, speaking in standard galactic and hoping she could understand. "Lyra," she replied in perfectly accented standard, confirming his suspicions.
My mama is Sunweaver Thessariah, guardian of the third realm.
She's dying, and I don't know how to help her." Marcus's combat computer ran a quick analysis of the corruption spreading through the dragon's body. The readings were unlike anything in his database, but the pattern was familiar. He'd seen similar energy signatures before, in the ruins of worlds touched by the Devourers, ancient entities that fed on life force itself. "Lyra," he said carefully, "how long has your mama been like this?" "3 sunsets," the child replied, tears streaming down her scaled cheeks. "The shadow men came from the dark between stars. They hurt her, and she fought them, but there were so many. She told me to hide, but I couldn't leave her. 3 days. The same amount of time Marcus had been running from the crash site, trying to stay ahead of something that his senses couldn't quite identify, but that set every survival instinct he had on high alert. The shadow men, as the child called them, were probably still out there, hunting. Marcus made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed if anyone back home ever found out about it. He activated his suit's emergency medical protocols and began examining the dragon with every scanner he had. The creature was dying, that much was certain. The corruption had spread through nearly 60% of her body, and conventional medicine, human, alien, or otherwise, wouldn't be enough to stop it. But Marcus had something that most people didn't, a stubborn refusal to accept the impossible. "Lyra," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I'm going to try to help your mama, but I need you to tell me everything you know about the Shadow Men. Everything." The child's golden eyes brightened with the first hope he'd seen in them. She nodded eagerly and began to speak, her words painting a picture of an enemy that defied comprehension. The Shadow Men weren't alive in any conventional sense. They were creatures of pure entropy, beings that existed to unmake reality itself. They fed on the life force of entire worlds, leaving behind nothing but dead space and bitter cold. They had come to Drakmor seeking the Dragonfolk, the last guardians of an ancient power that could hold back the darkness between stars. One by one, they had hunted down the great dragons, corrupting them from within until nothing remained but empty husks. Thessaria had been one of the last, and now she too was dying. Marcus listened to the child's story, while his suit ran every medical protocol it had. The corruption was spreading faster now, fed by the dragon's own life force. At this rate, she had maybe an hour left. "The Shadow Men," Lyra continued, her voice dropping to a frightened whisper. "They're afraid of only one thing. The old stories say that there's a species from a young world, warriors who carry the fire of their star in their hearts. They don't use magic like we do, and they can't bend reality with their will. But they have something else. Something the Shadow Men can't corrupt or consume." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with Drakmor's cold air. "What do they have, Lyra?" "Hope," she said simply. "They have hope that burns so bright it can light up the darkness itself. The old dragon said that when all seems lost, when the universe itself begins to die, the humans will be there. They'll stand against the darkness not because they can win, but because it's the right thing to do." Human. Again, that word, in the mouth of a child who shouldn't have known it existed. Marcus stood slowly, his wounded leg protesting every movement. Around them, the crystal plane seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and shadows moved in ways that shadows shouldn't move. The Shadow Men were coming, drawn by the scent of approaching death and the promise of another world's destruction. He thought about his orders, about the mission that had brought him to this distant corner of space. The Terran Expeditionary Force was supposed to scout new worlds, establish contact with friendly species, and avoid entanglement in local conflicts. Getting involved in what was clearly a war between forces he didn't understand was against every regulation in the book. Marcus Chen had never been very good at following regulations. He knelt beside the dying dragon's head and placed his hand against her massive snout. Her scale was warm beneath his palm, pulsing with a faint heartbeat that grew weaker with each passing moment. Through his suit's sensors, he could feel the corruption spreading through her body like ice in her veins. "Thessaria," he whispered, not knowing if she could hear him. "I'm Marcus Chen, Sergeant First Class, Terran Expeditionary Force. I don't know if I can save you, but I'm damn well going to try." The dragon's golden eye flickered open, focusing on him with an intelligence that was older than human civilization. When she spoke, her voice resonated through his bones, speaking directly to his mind in words that transcended language. "Human," she said, and there was wonder in her mental voice. "The prophecies spoke truly. You have come to us in our darkest hour, carrying the light of distant stars. But I am beyond saving, warrior of Earth. My time ends with this sunset." "Like hell it does," Marcus replied aloud, causing Lyra to gasp at his sudden vehemence. "I've seen the impossible happen before, and I've made a career out of doing what everyone said couldn't be done. So you just hold on, because this human isn't giving up on you." "You do not understand," Thessaria's voice grew fainter. "The corruption is not merely killing me, it is unmaking me. When I die, it will spread to Lyra, and through her to the last sanctuary of our people. The Shadow Men will have won, and this galaxy will fall to the darkness between stars." Marcus's jaw set in a line that his old squad mates would have recognized as trouble. He'd worn that same expression when he'd single-handedly held the line at New Moscow for 6 hours, when he'd warped into the reactor core at Kepler 442b to manually shut down a meltdown, and when he'd volunteered for the suicide mission that had turned the tide of the Centauri campaign. "Then I guess I'll have to make sure you don't die," he said simply. He stood and activated every medical system his suit had, including several that carried warnings about unauthorized use. His nanomeds received new programming instructions that would have horrified their designers. His power cells rerouted energy to systems that weren't meant to handle it, and deep in his suit's AI core, emergency protocols came online that had never been tested outside of laboratory conditions. "Lyra," he said, his voice taking on the tone of command that had once led men and women through the fires of hell itself. "I need you to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you. Can you do that?" The child nodded solemnly, her golden eyes fixed on his face with absolute trust. It was the kind of trust that could break a man's heart or make him into something greater than he ever thought possible. "Good," Marcus said, checking his weapon one last time. "Because the Shadow Men are coming, and we're going to show them why you don't mess with dragons when there's a human around to do something about it." In the distance, darkness began to coalesce into shapes that hurt to look at directly. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds, and the crystal formations around them began to crack and shatter, as reality itself seemed to recoil from what was approaching. Marcus Chen, veteran of a dozen wars and survivor of 100 battles, stood between a dying dragon and the forces that would unmake existence itself. His weapon was nearly depleted, his armor was failing, and he was 47,000 light-years from home. He smiled. "Come on then," he whispered to the approaching darkness. "Let's see what you've got." The first Shadow Man materialized at the crater's edge, its form a writhing mass of negation that made Marcus's eyes water to look at directly. It had no features that human perception could process, but somehow he knew it was looking at him with something that might have been curiosity. Then it spoke, its voice, the sound of dying stars and forgotten hopes. "Human," it said, and the word was filled with such contempt that frost began forming on Marcus's visor. "You do not belong in this place of ending. Depart, and we will grant you the mercy of a quick dissolution." Marcus checked his plasma pistol's charge one more time, then looked down at Lyra, who was pressing herself against her mother's dying form. The child's eyes were wide with terror, but when she looked at him, he saw something else there too. "Hope. You know," Marcus said conversationally, as more shadow men began materializing around the crater's rim. "I've been told to leave a lot of places in my time, and I've got to say, the politeness varies quite a bit, but there's one thing that's always the same." He raised his weapon and took aim at the center of the nearest Shadow Man's mass. "I never was very good at taking orders from things that shouldn't exist." The plasma bolt that erupted from his pistol was brilliant white-hot, a piece of contained stellar fury that lit up the dying world like a miniature sun. It struck the Shadow Man's center mass, and for a moment, just a moment, the creature's form wavered, Then it laughed, a sound like the heat death of the universe, and began to advance. Marcus smiled again, wider this time. "Well," he said, settling into a fighting stance that had been drilled into him through years of combat training, "this should be interesting." The Shadow Man's laughter died as Marcus's second plasma bolt tore through its form. And this time, something unexpected happened. Where the superheated energy struck, the creature's darkness didn't just waver, it burned. Not with fire or heat, but with something deeper. Something that made the very air around them sing with harmonics that hurt Marcus's ears and made Lyra gasp in wonder. "That's new," Marcus muttered, firing again, and watching another Shadow Man writhe as his weapon found its mark. His HUD was going crazy, displaying readings that made no sense according to everything he knew about physics. His plasma bolts weren't just hitting the creatures. They were somehow infused with something else. Something his instruments couldn't identify, but that the Shadow Men clearly didn't like. The lead Shadow Man hissed, its form rippling like water disturbed by a stone. When it spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been uncertainty. "Impossible," it said, the word dripping with disbelief. "You are merely human. Your weapons are crude matter energy conversion. You cannot harm us." Marcus reloaded his weapon with practiced efficiency, his eyes never leaving the creatures surrounding them. "Yeah, well, maybe you need better intelligence reports. Because last I checked, making impossible things possible was kind of our specialty." Behind him, Thessaria's breathing grew more labored, each exhalation sending tremors through the ground. The corruption was spreading faster now, black veins racing across her golden scales like living shadows. Lyra pressed closer to her mother's massive form, her small hands glowing with a faint light, as she tried desperately to slow the spread of the darkness consuming her only remaining family. "It's not working," the child whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The shadow is too strong. Mama, please don't leave me alone." Marcus felt something twist in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when he'd watched his squad mates die on New Moscow, when he'd held Corporal Jenkins as she bled out in his arms, when he'd stood over the graves of friends whose names were carved on monuments they'd never see. It was the rage that came from watching evil win, from seeing innocents suffer, from being confronted with the universe's fundamental unfairness. But unlike those other times, this time he wasn't powerless to do something about it. "Lyra," he called over his shoulder while putting another bolt into a Shadow Man that was trying to flank them. "When I was your age, my grandmother used to tell me stories about heroes. Want to know what the best heroes always had in common?" The child looked up at him, hope flickering in her golden eyes, despite everything. "What?" "They never fought alone," Marcus said, and activated something in his suit that he'd hoped never to use, and neither do we. The emergency beacon that had been sending out a standard distress signal suddenly changed its frequency, broadcasting on channels that officially didn't exist. Deep space monitoring stations that weren't supposed to be there picked up the transmission and relayed it through quantum entanglement networks that operated outside normal spacetime. In 14 different star systems, emergency response protocols that had never been tested outside of war games suddenly came online. But more importantly, the beacon began broadcasting something else, something that Marcus himself didn't fully understand, but that his suit's AI assured him was necessary. Biometric data, neural pattern recordings, emotional resonance frequencies. The sum total of what made Marcus Chen who he was, transmitted across impossible distances to receivers that shouldn't have existed. "What did you do?" the lead Shadow Man demanded, its form suddenly agitated. "What have you called?" "Back up," Marcus said simply, and continued firing. The battle that followed would have been impossible to describe to anyone who hadn't witnessed it firsthand. The Shadow Men attacked with weapons that unmade reality itself, tearing holes in space-time that revealed the cold emptiness between dimensions. Marcus fought back with plasma and determination, his shots somehow burning away pieces of the creatures that should have been immune to physical harm. But it was more than just weapons. As the fight continued, Marcus began to understand what was happening. Each time he fired, each time he refused to give ground despite impossible odds, each time he looked at Lyra and silently promised her that she wouldn't lose her mother while he still drew breath. Something fundamental shifted in the quantum foam around them. Hope, it turned out, wasn't just an emotion. At least not when it burned hot enough. The first Shadow Man to actually die came as a complete surprise to everyone involved, Marcus included. He'd emptied his weapon's power cell and was reloading when the creature lunged at him, its form expanding to engulf his entire field of vision. For a moment, he was inside the thing, surrounded by absolute darkness that was more than the absence of light. It was the absence of possibility itself. But Marcus Chen had spent 3 days crawling across a dying world with broken bones and failing equipment, driven by nothing more than the stubborn refusal to give up. He'd survived wars that had claimed better soldiers than him, walked away from situations that should have killed him, and made a career out of doing what everyone said couldn't be done. Impossibility was his native element. So when the Shadow Man tried to unmake him, tried to reduce him to nothing more than a bad memory in an empty universe, Marcus did what came naturally. He refused. The creature screamed, actually screamed, with a sound like tearing reality. And suddenly, Marcus was standing in the crater again, his armor smoking but intact. Where the Shadow Man had been, there was nothing but empty air and the faint scent of ozone. "Did you just—" Lyra stared at him with wide eyes. "Did you just make one of them disappear by saying no?" "Apparently," Marcus said, checking his weapon and trying to process what had just happened. His suit's readings were completely insane now, showing energy levels that should have reduced him to component atoms. But he felt fine. Better than fine, actually. He felt like he could take on the entire universe if necessary. Which was good, because that's exactly what he was about to have to do. The remaining Shadow Men had stopped their advance, clustering together in a way that suggested rapid communication. When they moved again, it was as a coordinated unit, their individual forms merging and flowing together into something larger and infinitely more terrible. "The Unmaker comes." Thessaria's mental voice was barely a whisper now. "Human, you have done more than any of us dared hope. But it is not enough. When the Unmaker manifests fully, this world will become a void in space, and the corruption will spread to every inhabited system within 1,000 light years." Marcus looked up at the writhing mass of darkness taking shape above them. It was huge, easily the size of a city block, and reality bent and twisted around it like heat distortion. Just looking at it made his eyes water, and his brain tried to convince him that what he was seeing couldn't possibly exist. "How long do I have?" he asked, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "Minutes," Thessaria replied. "Perhaps less. It feeds on despair and endings growing stronger with each death, each failure, each moment of surrender." Marcus nodded and knelt beside Lyra, who was still trying desperately to heal her mother, with powers she barely understood. The child's scales were beginning to show the same dark veins that were killing Thessaria. The corruption was spreading to her as well. "Lyra," he said gently, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. In about 2 minutes, I'm going to do something that's either going to save your mother or get us all killed. Possibly both." The child looked up at him with those golden eyes that held far too much wisdom for someone so young. "What are you going to do?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time since he'd crashed on this dying world, it was a smile of genuine confidence. "I'm going to do what humans do best. I'm going to improvise." He stood and activated every emergency protocol in his suit simultaneously. Warnings flashed across his HUD as power cells overloaded and systems ran far beyond their design specifications. His nanomeds went into overdrive, flooding his bloodstream with stimulants and combat enhancers that would probably kill him in a few hours, but would keep him functional for the next few minutes. "Suit," he said aloud. "Remember those theoretical physics papers about quantum resonance and consciousness interaction that Command made me study?" "Affirmative," his AI replied in a voice that somehow managed to sound dubious. "However, I feel obligated to point out that those theories remain unproven, and attempting to implement them has a 97.3% probability of resulting in immediate death." "Yeah, well," Marcus said, watching the Unmaker begin to descend toward them like a falling mountain of organized chaos. "Dying was always part of the job description. Run the protocols." What happened next would be studied by theoretical physicists and xenobiologists for generations to come, assuming there were any generations left to study it. Marcus's suit, powered by fusion cells that were pushing well beyond their safety limits, began broadcasting on frequencies that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. His consciousness, enhanced and amplified by systems that had never been designed for this purpose, reached out into the quantum foam that underlied all reality. And for just a moment he touched something vast and ancient and powerful beyond description. The Dragonfolk had called it the heart of creation, the source from which all life and possibility flowed. Scientists had theorized about it as the quantum field that gave consciousness the ability to observe and therefore collapse probability waves. Philosophers had debated whether it was God, or physics, or something beyond both. Marcus just called it hope. The light that erupted from his position was visible from orbit. It wasn't electromagnetic radiation, or any form of energy that appeared on conventional senses. It was possibility made manifest, the raw stuff of what if, and maybe, And yes, we can, given form and substance. It washed over the Unmaker like a tsunami of pure potential, and for the first time in eons, the creature of absolute negation encountered something that it could not unmake. The battle between light and darkness lasted exactly 37 seconds by Marcus's chronometer. To him, it felt like hours. Hours of pushing against something that wanted to reduce him to nothing more than a footnote in an empty universe. Hours of holding on to the simple truth that things could be better, that tomorrow could be brighter than today, that love and courage and stubborn determination meant something in a cosmos that too often seemed cruel and random. When it was over, the Unmaker was gone. Not destroyed. Marcus wasn't sure if something like that could ever truly be destroyed, that sent back to whatever dark realm it had crawled out of, and sealed there by barriers of crystallized hope that would take it millennia to break through. The Shadow Men were gone too, their forms dissolved by contact with something their fundamental nature couldn't process or understand. Where they had stood, small flowers were beginning to grow in the crystalline sand, the first new life Drakmor had seen in generations. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his suit's power completely drained, and his body pushed far beyond its limits. But when he looked up, he saw something that made every moment of agony worthwhile. Thessaria's eyes were open and clear, the golden light in them burning bright and strong. The corruption was retreating from her scales, black veins fading like frost in sunlight, and beside her, Lyra was laughing. Actually laughing, as her own small form began to glow with the same warm radiance. Human! Thessaria's mental voice was filled with wonder and gratitude. What have you done? Marcus managed a weak smile as his consciousness began to fade. What we always do, he whispered. We refuse to give up. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Lyra's face, her golden eyes bright with tears of joy as she reached out to touch his hand. In that touch, he felt something pass between them. A connection that transcended species and worlds and the vast gulfs of space that separated their peoples. When he woke 3 days later in what could only be described as the most comfortable bed in the known universe, surrounded by dragons of every size and color imaginable, Marcus Chen discovered that he had become something unprecedented in galactic history. He had become hope made manifest, the living proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. And in the years that followed, when the Shadow Men returned to other worlds, when the darkness between stars began to encroach on inhabited systems, when despair threatened to overwhelm entire civilizations, there would be a call that went out across the quantum networks. A call for humanity. Because the universe had learned something important that day on Drakemore, when all hope seems lost, when evil appears triumphant, when the very foundations of reality begin to crumble, there's one species that will stand against the darkness not because they can win, but because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. 6 months after the Battle of Drakemore, as the historians were already calling it, Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Unity's Dawn, the first joint human-dragon vessel ever constructed. Through the massive, crystalline viewports, he could see the blue-green marble of New Terra, hanging in space like a jewel against the starfield. It was beautiful, peaceful, and absolutely nothing like the dying world where he'd first met Lyra and her mother. "You're thinking too loudly again," came a familiar voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Thessaria approaching in her humanoid form. A tall, elegant woman with golden skin that held the faint shimmer of scales, and eyes that burned with the wisdom of ages. It had taken him weeks to get used to seeing her like this, instead of as the massive dragon he'd first encountered. But he'd learned that the dragon folk were shapeshifters by nature, able to take whatever form best suited their current needs. "Sorry," Marcus said with a rueful smile. "Still getting used to the whole telepathic connection thing. Lyra keeps telling me I need to learn to organize my thoughts better." "She's right, as usual," Thessaria replied, moving to stand beside him at the viewport. "Though I must admit, the chaos of human consciousness is refreshing. We dragons tend toward very ordered thought patterns. Your minds are like storms, chaotic, yes, but beautiful and full of unexpected possibilities." Marcus chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "Where is Lyra anyway? Last I saw her, she was terrorizing the engineering staff with questions about quantum field dynamics." "She's in the neural interface chamber with Dr. Williams and the integration team," Thessaria said, her expression growing more serious. "Well, they're preparing for the final connection test." The final test. Marcus felt a familiar knot of tension form in his stomach. Over the past 6 months, The greatest minds of both species had been working to understand what had happened on Drakmor, and more importantly, how to replicate it. The answer had turned out to be both simpler and more complex than anyone had expected. The key wasn't technology, though that was certainly involved. It wasn't magic, though the dragon's understanding of reality shaping had proved essential. The key was connection, the quantum entanglement between consciousness and possibility that occurred when hope burned bright enough to actually alter the fabric of space-time. Humans, it turned out, were uniquely suited for this kind of connection. Their chaotic thought patterns, their stubborn refusal to accept defeat, their ability to hope against all evidence and logic. These weren't flaws or quirks of evolution. They were weapons in a war that most species didn't even know they were fighting. "Are you worried?" Marcus asked, watching a squadron of sleek fighters, half-human design, half-dragon tech, patrol the space around New Terra. "Terrified," Thesaria admitted without hesitation. "What we're attempting has never been tried before." "If it fails." "It won't," Marcus said with quiet confidence. "I've seen that kid stare down creatures of pure entropy and tell them they can't have her mother. A little quantum engineering isn't going to faze her." As if summoned by their conversation, Lyra's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. She was 12 now, or at least the dragon equivalent, and had grown into her role as the first human-dragon hybrid consciousness with the kind of fearless enthusiasm that made seasoned warriors nervous and quantum physicists weep with joy. "Marcus, Thesaria, you need to come to the neural chamber now. Dr. Williams says the resonance patterns are stabilizing, and I think I can feel the network coming online." Marcus and Thesaria exchanged glances. The network. 6 months of work, the combined efforts of humanity's best scientists and the dragonfolk's most skilled reality shapers, all building toward this moment. They made their way through the ship's corridors at a pace just short of running. The Unity's dawn was a marvel of hybrid engineering, its organic curves flowing seamlessly with angular human technology. Gravity fields maintained by Dragonsong interfaced with artificial gravity generators. Crystalline computing cores grew alongside quantum processors. It was beautiful and alien, and somehow perfectly natural all at the same time. The neural interface chamber was a spherical room at the ship's heart, its walls covered in a mixture of human neural interface equipment and dragon memory crystals. At the center, suspended in a field of softly glowing energy, was Lyra. She'd grown taller over the past months, her horns more pronounced and her wings large enough now to actually provide lift. But her eyes were the same gold Marcus remembered from that first day on Drakmor, bright with intelligence and unshakable courage. "The resonance is holding steady," Dr. Williams called out from his control station. The elderly scientist looked exhausted but exhilarated, his hair even whiter than when Marcus had first met him. "Quantum entanglement with the test subjects is maintaining coherence across interstellar distances. I think we've actually done it." What they'd done was create a network, a quantum communication system that linked consciousness across space and time, but it wasn't just for communication. The network allowed for the sharing of what the dragons called possibility resonance, the ability to alter reality through focused will and hope. With it, a single human could potentially channel the hope and determination of their entire species, becoming a focal point for humanity's unique ability to make impossible things happen. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked Lyra as the energy field around her began to dissipate. "Like I'm connected to everyone," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel you, and Thesaria, and Dr. Williams, but also others, thousands of them. Millions, all across human space and dragon territory. It's like a song that everyone's singing together, even though they don't know the words." Thesaria moved closer, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "The network is stable?" "More than stable, Dr. Chin," Williams said, consulting his instruments. "The quantum field is actually strengthening as more consciousness join it. It's self-reinforcing. Every person who connects makes the whole system more powerful." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. They'd created something unprecedented, a way for the scattered children of Earth to stand together no matter how far apart they might be. When the Shadow Men returned, when new threats emerged from the darkness between stars, humanity wouldn't face them alone. They'd face them as one species, united by bonds that transcended space and time. "There's something else," Lyra said, her golden eyes focusing on something only she could see. "The network isn't just connecting humans and dragons. There are others out there, other species who've been fighting the Shadow Men for longer than either of our civilizations have existed. They'd been waiting, hoping for someone to light a beacon they could follow. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Humanity wasn't alone in the fight against entropy and despair. Across the galaxy, other species had been waging the same war, isolated and struggling against forces that sought to reduce the universe to cold emptiness. But now, with the network in place, they could find each other. "Show me," Marcus said. Lyra smiled and gestured for him to place his hand on one of the interface crystals. The moment his skin made contact, Marcus felt his consciousness expand exponentially. Suddenly, he wasn't just Marcus Chen, standing in a chamber on a ship orbiting New Terra. He was part of something vast and beautiful and impossibly complex. He could feel Dr. Williams's excitement and exhaustion, Thessaria's ancient wisdom and newfound hope. The crew of the Unity's Dawn, human and dragon alike, all connected by threads of shared purpose. But beyond them, stretching out across the galaxy like a web of light in the darkness, were others. A species of crystal beings who sang reality into new shapes, their harmonies holding back the void for 1,000 years. Warrior poets from the Andromeda galaxy who carved their defiance against entropy into the very fabric of space-time. Ancient AIs who had long ago transcended their programming and chose love over logic, hope over analysis. All of them fighting the same fight. All of them standing against the darkness between stars. All of them waiting for someone to show them that they weren't alone. "This is why we're here," Marcus realized aloud. "This is why humans spread so far so fast. Why we never give up, no matter how impossible things get. We're not conquerors or explorers or even survivors. We're connectors. We're the species that brings everyone else together." "The universe has been very lonely," Thessaria said softly. "Each species fighting its own war, believing itself the only light in an infinite darkness. But you humans, you have this impossible ability to look at the void and see not emptiness but potential. To look at strangers and see family waiting to be met." The network pulsed around them, growing stronger as more consciousness joined the song. On distant worlds, humans who had never heard of the Shadow Men suddenly felt less alone. Dragon folk who had thought themselves the last guardians of hope discovered allies among the stars. And across the galaxy, ancient species who had fought the darkness for eons lifted their heads and saw, for the first time in millennia, the light of dawn on the horizon. "What happens now?" Dr. Williams asked, his scientific mind already racing ahead to the implications and possibilities. Marcus looked around the chamber at the faces of his friends, his family, his species' first steps into a larger universe. Through the network, he could feel the hopes and dreams of billions of beings, all connected by the simple understanding that things could be better, that tomorrow could be brighter than today, that love and courage and stubborn determination meant something in a cosmos that was vast and strange, but not empty. "Now we do what we've always done," he said with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. "We make friends with strangers, we help where we can, and we refuse to give up." The Shadow Men thought they were hunting isolated species. Instead, they've just awakened something that's been sleeping for far too long. "And what's that?" Lyra asked, though her golden eyes already held the answer. "Hope," Marcus said simply. Organized, weaponized, and absolutely refusing to take no for an answer. The network pulsed again, and this time Marcus felt something new join the song, a harmony that spoke of ancient wisdom and patient strength, of beings who had waited in the darkness between galaxies for this moment. The cavalry, it seemed, was finally arriving. In the months and years that followed, the galaxy would learn what it meant to have humanity as a neighbor. They would discover that humans didn't just fight the darkness, they inspired others to fight it too. They built alliances where none had existed before, found common ground between species that had never met, and somehow convinced entire civilizations that the impossible was just another word for "we haven't figured out how yet." Forces of entropy and despair always did. But when they came, they would find a galaxy united, a network of hope that stretched from the smallest human colony to the ancient dragon realms, to species whose names couldn't be pronounced by vocal cords, but whose courage needed no translation. And at the center of it all, in a quantum network that defied everything the universe thought it knew about physics and consciousness, the song would continue. A song of hope and determination, of love conquering fear, of light piercing darkness. A song that would echo through the stars until the last sentient being drew breath, reminding them all of a simple truth that one stubborn human had proven on a dying world 6 months ago. Sometimes, refusing to give up really is enough to change everything. Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Unity's Dawn, watching the stars wheel overhead, and smiled. Behind him, he could hear Lyra laughing at something Dr. Williams had said, could feel Thessaria's warm presence through the network, could sense the hopes and dreams of billions of beings across the galaxy, all connected by invisible threads of possibility and determination. The universe was vast and often cruel and filled with forces that wanted to reduce everything to cold, empty silence. But it was also filled with humans, and that, as it turned out, made all the difference.